Mira, thank you for that overly generous and kind and welcoming introduction. And also, Radhika, thank you so much for the amazing work you've done in organizing this along with the entire Dasra community. I do want to say on behalf of the Freeman Spogli Institute, where you sit, I'm a senior fellow there, and on behalf of the Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law, which I was directing until a couple months ago, but as a Democrat, I believe strongly in rotation of leadership, so my colleague Frank Fukuyama has succeeded me. And our program on liberation technology, our program manager who has extensive and very innovative research projects in India, Vivek, is right there. We want to warmly welcome you to Encina Hall today. I don't know, how many of you know what this room was when Stanford University opened in 1891? And so not even the Stanford alumni know that, which is very interesting. This room was the original men's dormitory. And somewhere in this building lived a future president of the United States, Herbert Hoover. And the most important thing I can say about Stanford, and indeed the only thing I have time to say about Stanford until the last 30 seconds of my remarks, is that this amazing institution exists because of the philanthropy of an extraordinarily wealthy American couple, Leland and Jane Stanford. And I think you probably know Leland Stanford's history as both an industrialist, a railroad magnate, senator and governor from California, who had the vision, it is very important and to emphasize, not to just create this university, this nonprofit institution to educate young people, but quite specifically, and it is in the documented legacy of Jane Stanford, who extensively outlived her husband, to do so in the expectation that with the education provided by this institution, its graduates would become, quote, of greater service to the public. So the building of an alumni who would be doing what you are doing, and I realize most of you are not alumni of Stanford, but you're always welcome to come back to our professional programs or send your kids here someday or whatever it might be. But we were founded as a public service university, and we're deeply committed to it. And it's no accident that there are so many programs on campus, not only the Center on Democracy, Development and Civil Society, but PAX, the Philanthropy and Civil Society Center, the Center for Ethics and Public Policy, who are devoted to this, this mission of what we can do together, and really what we have an obligation to do together, being so fortunate as we are to create a better community at every level, whether it's our own local community where we face so many challenges, really just like 4 miles down the road in East Palo Alto across the freeway, and in other communities that are being really pressured, ironically, by the success of the Silicon Valley, or whether it's in our states. We have 2 federal systems here, so we know what it means to work on policy challenges at multiple levels of governance, at the national level and, of course, the international level. I want to thank Tarun Jotwani for his remarks, because one of the things he said I really want to underscore. And I'm also a senior fellow at Hoover. I didn't know, actually, that Milton Friedman had made the point that you quoted him as making, Tarun, but it was a point I wanted to make, so now I will acknowledge you and Milton Friedman that philanthropy is very important to the success of capitalism in multiple respects, but 2 of them are obvious. One is that capitalism tends to generate inequality. That's a good thing in one sense, because societies are not going to advance unless they generate wealth. Wealth is good. But we need, as societies, to lift all boats if societies are going to remain peaceful, governable, and morally appealing. The second reason is, therefore, that is not just the moral one, but the ability of capitalism to function in a world where it can get the skills, the labor, and the recognition for its need to generate incentives to create wealth that it requires. And we have a host of problems in the world that have been eloquently addressed already in the previous remarks, but I do want to say, while poverty is very extreme in India, and obviously maybe uniquely degrading in countries that have this kind of poverty that was so graphically described, we have severe and growing problems of poverty in the United States. And inequality is increasing in most countries in the world as the returns to education and technology increase. That generates a redoubled imperative to work at multiple levels to address these challenges. I do want to say parenthetically, I think of myself as an egghead. I have a friend up in San Francisco, Lori Chickering, who, and not in the academic sense, Lori Chickering founded an organization called Educate Girls Globally. He is one of many individuals who have convinced me over a long period of time, as both a scholar and a Democrat, that there's no higher challenge than the ones you three individuals have already spoken to, which is to level the gender inequality and educate girls as the cutting edge of the wedge of improving social justice. In this task, I don't quite agree with an icon of my other institution, the Hoover Institution, Ronald Reagan, that government is not the solution, government is the problem. I think government is part of the solution, but in the spirit of President Reagan, it can only be a part of the solution. And without a vibrant philanthropic sector, we can't get an adequate grasp on these problems. And I think there are several reasons why. One is, we all know government moves slowly. And it tends to be bureaucratic, and it tends to shy away from risk-taking. And the beautiful thing about private philanthropy is it's unshackled from that. It can move more quickly, it can take risks, it can identify new ways and new challenges, and kind of perhaps the best way to put it is it can bring an entrepreneurial spirit and an entrepreneurial mentality to the mobilization of resources to address social problems and relieve social injustices and kind of ignite human energy. Another point I'd make about the value of civil society philanthropy is that we need pluralism. We don't know what's going to work. As an academic, I'm continually impressed with how little we know. And how much we need to struggle to constantly evaluate different alternatives. And frankly, how much progress we're making in mobilizing different research methods to try and evaluate. But if we don't know what's going to work, then we do need pluralism of approaches and initiatives. And that cannot come through government alone. It helps to have a federal system where different states can do different things, but we need the private sector. And in this case, in terms of addressing social problems, the third sector of philanthropy to address these problems. And then there is an intimate relationship between civil society and democracy that I think you all appreciate, and it's a two-way relationship. Civil society can thrive much better in a democracy than it can in an authoritarian regime. This is why, if you will allow me to make this comparison, I think this sector is flourishing in India and evolving and challenging and probing boundaries in India in a much more creative and bold way than it's able to do in China. But it's also the case that civil society has a lot to contribute to the vigor and depth of democracy by generating a volunteer spirit, by generating independent sources of power and energy outside the state, and by helping the state and partnering the state to deal with the enormous challenges of governance without which the state cannot be legitimate in the long run if it doesn't address these challenges. Moreover, as we know in India, but really, frankly, I could go on at length about this, in the United States as well, even democratic states have problems of lack of accountability, of corruption that need to be addressed. And I think there's enormous potential and need for non-governmental organizations and philanthropic work to address the big challenges of governance and accountability that we face, and that's one of the things we're doing here at the Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law. We've worked with Omidyar Network, we've worked with the Hewlett Foundation, and a number of other philanthropic ventures. Finally, I want to say that you can't have a good society, in my opinion. This is somewhat a normative statement, but it's also an analytic statement, and you certainly can't have a good, deep, quality and sustainable democracy without very deep reservoirs of social capital. People need to be connected to one another. And even if you have a good and enlightened state, you cannot leave it all to the state sector. You need these reservoirs of social trust and cooperation to advance the social good. Sweden is constantly bashed, or the Scandinavian countries more generally, as being, socialist, having large states. But they also have large civil societies and very extensive philanthropic sectors and huge reservoirs of social capital. And social capital creates not only the ability to collaborate for social good, but it creates trust. And if you don't have trust at the individual level, if you don't have trust at the group level, in the end, you can't have a successful society and a society that's capable of meeting the great and driving challenges that we're talking about at this conference. I guess I do want to say one final word. We value enormously the emerging and rapidly proliferating partnership between India and the United States. Not only, as Americans do we value it, but here at Stanford as well. There are very few things that we in this building, the Freeman Spogli Institute, want to see more passionately than the growth of Indian studies and South Asian studies more generally, and the proliferation of partnerships between Stanford University and India. So please keep sending your kids to us, and please keep coming back for these conferences. Thank you.